So JD, you're the CEO of Raygun. You do application monitoring. I have to admit, I was working on an application where I didn't have Raygun, and I was in a text file. I was looking through the logs. I was in my, I was in my call stack, and I was not feeling very close to the customer. I just wanted to know what button they clicked and why the site was slow. How can Raygun help me with something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing we do with our default behaviors when you put in our SDK is we'll try and collect as much information at the time of a fault or performance issue about an action. And that includes things like a breadcrumb of all of the DOM events, button clicks, all of that sort of stuff. So you can actually recreate the entire process that the customer went through when those issues occurred, helping you recreate them. As a developer myself, sometimes that's the hardest thing in debugging. It works on my machine. Okay, give me more detail so I can work out why it didn't work on the other machine.
Right, and that's the information that I need. That's that X-ray vision that gets me into my code. I just want to know what they clicked, how they got there, and how I can help them. I want to feel closer to my customer, and Raygun will give me that visibility into the quality and the performance of my web apps or my mobile apps. And folks that are listening can sign up for a free trial at raygun.com. Hi, I'm Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today I'm chatting with Daniel Rowe. He's on the Nuxt core team and loves all things JavaScript and the web. And today we'll be chatting about Elk and the Fediverse. How are you, sir?
I am well, thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm thrilled to be chatting with you. So there's a lot of parts that are enabling the app that I like to use called Elk that I access my Mastodon instance with. But in order to talk about all those things, I think we have to back way, way up. So you identify as a enthusiast of the web. Is that a fair statement, the open web?
That is totally true.
And the stack got complicated, I feel like, over the last 5 or 10 years. We were told to learn HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript. And then for a lot of us, we blinked, and there's a lot of stuff underneath right now. What is currently, if you can phrase this, what is powering the web today?
Well, that is an interesting question. I think you could go a lot of places with that, but I think magic and dreams, really. So, I mean, my background is really HTML and CSS. Actually, I started doing stuff with computers before CSS existed, or I remember learning about it at some point and thinking, "Whoa, this changes things." So I think that sort of dates me. But really, I think at the moment, we are just what powers the web. I think it's still the same things, and we just have different ways of interfacing with them as developers. So, for example, I also still remember when I first came across declarative JavaScript frameworks. And the idea that you could basically connect the markup, the HTML that you wanted to display, to data. And you could say, I want this HTML to be displaying when the data is like this. And actually, I don't need to write any of the binding and glue logic that's going to make the HTML change when the data changes. All I need to do is just say that it's connected in this way and model the logic and then leave the mutation and the removing of elements, the changing of this, leave that to the framework. And that sort of logic first side of things was a huge thing for me. And obviously then a lot of frameworks share that kind of declarative model of the web. But of course, it's still HTML at the end of the day that is actually making everything happen, and CSS and all of that. I do think JavaScript is glue in that kind of way. It enables a better experience for us as developers.
Sometimes I feel like we may lose what I call dark matter developers. These are the developers that are the space between the stars. And while everyone on Twitter and Mastodon is off talking about the next new noun.js, there's someone that's, I talk about the chief architect in the Nebraska Department of Forestry or the IT department at Little Debbie Snack Cakes. This is just the people that make the world work that are maybe on Angular. And they woke up and then suddenly there was React and then there was Vue and then there was Nuxt. Could you explain the stack from the point of, because I think the dark matter developer understood JavaScript and they understood Angular, and then they put their head down for a year and they came back and there was 1,000 things to choose from. Help me walk the stack up to the point where we have Nuxt.
Okay, that's cool. The starting point for Nuxt is Vue. So Vue is a library for building web apps. It's a declarative library, JavaScript library, which allows you to express how the state of your web app and what it should do in declarative terms. One of the reasons I like Vue is that it plays quite well with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript as pure languages. The way Vue tends to handle components, for example, little pieces of your app, is that there's a bit of what looks like HTML, a bit of what looks like CSS, and a bit of what looks like a script or JavaScript. So when I had an agency, it was easy for me to bring somebody in who knew HTML and CSS and actually just have them write just that. They didn't need to write anything else. And then actually wiring it up with some logic was a relatively small step on top of that. Vue is a lovely, lovely framework. And Nuxt was built on top of that. So it was built to basically do a lot of the hard work. So configuring Webpack and figuring out how to get server-side rendering working so that the actual server would give you HTML rather than just a white screen with a loading spinner. And that was how Nuxt started. It was a project that had Vue fully configured, and gradually more and more features were added, became a framework on its own. So Nuxt became a meta framework. If you're in the React world, you might have heard of Next.js. Next and Nuxt are friendly rivals. Next does what Nuxt does for React, and Nuxt does what Next does for Vue. And obviously, we each have a few distinctive, unique things. And one of Nuxt is the fact that it's possible to write modules that hook into how the framework works at a very core level and add functionality and features to it. On top of the fact that it's a framework for Vue, we recently rewrote Nuxt from the ground up, from nothing. And that was because we had a few dependencies that had really major breaking changes. And there were also some interesting new developments in the ecosystem. So one was a bundler integration called Vite. And obviously Vue, which is one of our key libraries, had a major breaking change. And some of the features we have in our new version of Nuxt are focused around servers and how we integrate with a new kind of server built for a serverless web. So without going into too much detail there, the stack for Elk is based on Vue as a sort of front-end in-browser rendering engine served up by a server which we've rewritten, which is called Nitro, which is aimed to be optimized for serverless deployments. We're actually deployed on Netlify, but we have people deploying Elk to Cloudflare workers or Basel or hosting it in their own Docker containers. We try and be an provider agnostic at the Nuxt level itself. Where we hit bare metal, I guess you could say the stack ends. It could be anything that's serving it up, but that server serves up HTML that comes to our users. Their browser hydrates it, makes it interactive with the JavaScript we provide, and that's pretty much it end to end. I mean, I say there's a lot more, but
no, of course. And oversimplification is one of the things that happens on any podcast. And I'm sure someone's listening and saying, well, that's not exactly how it works, but we have no video and we have only so much, time. Okay. So the stack starts from the top down. The stack starts at Nuxt, and that's that framework that really its goal is to be intuitive. Like that is the tagline for Nuxt. If we do one thing, we make it as intuitive as possible. And then Elk, which we haven't quite introduced yet, is this wonderful front end on top of Mastodon. It's a web client for Mastodon. And one of the great things that I've always recommended to people, if you're working on a framework, if you're working on a plumbing, is build a house. And it seems like you're almost using Elk as a place to play and try new things and try new techniques. Like you're building a real app, but then you're also building the framework underneath that. Is that a fair statement?
That's totally true. So it wasn't done intentionally that way, but that is absolutely how it's turned out. One of the Nuxt team, actually, is Anthony Fu, he's much more than Nuxt, although he is on the core team and a great asset to it. He said, "Hey, I think it would be cool for us to build a Mastodon client. And this was, I think, there had been just a very significant move of people from Twitter to Mastodon, given a whole range of actions that took place. I think this was about in November, October of last year. And I think people were beginning to get really worried about Twitter and the future of Twitter. And there was this other social network, this Mastodon thing out there, which maybe some of us had created an account on a few years ago, but never really quite moved over to or started using. And suddenly it was looking more and more attractive. And it had this API. So it was possible to get all the data without having to use the web client that it shipped with, which was maybe a little bit unintuitive for people who were new to it. And also could use maybe, I don't mean to say anything negative about it, but maybe it wasn't to some people's taste. And it suddenly, we sort of suddenly realized we could build our own thing. We could make it look like whatever we wanted. You know, if you're using a social network, the idea that you could control or influence what it was like to the extent that you wanted it to be a bit different, you could go to your editor, make a few tweaks, and actually the social network you were using would be more intuitive or would solve that friction point. That is a really interesting idea. The idea that you can hack yourself on something that you use on a daily basis. This invitation for the new repository, which we originally called it Nuxtodon, and I'm very glad that is not the name now, but it came popping into my inbox, and then a few more folk started helping out. Matthias from the Vite core team and Kevin, he's on the Vue.js core team. Commits started pouring in, and before long, we had a full working thing. And then it was still private, but we started opening it up and inviting other people to contribute when they sort of asked us about it. We had 130 contributors before we actually open sourced the thing. And everyone, I think, was really excited by this vision of making the tool that you use. Because for me, I think I love code because you can make magic true. You take something that you are imagining to be true, to be the case, and you make it real for yourself. And we were all suddenly able to do that, our social network. So it was really cool. And of course, along the way, we learned a lot more about how Mastodon works. The fact that it's this sort of network. It's not just one computer somewhere serving up all the posts that people make. Obviously, you know this. Is it worth saying a little bit about what Mastodon is and how it works?
Yeah, I think it's worth also because when we had our little introduction there, I commented about the open web, and I've always said bet on the open web, and I've been a huge fan of blogging, and whether it was OpenID or meta tags for discovery, if you can control your domain, if you can own your words, then rather than pouring your words into a walled garden, then there's value in that. And having a Mastodon account or like yours is at actually row.dev. So I don't know if you're running your own instance of Mastodon or running a Pleroma instance. I don't know. Those are all declarations of like, I want my own space. So here, people, I think, have forgotten in 2006, 2007, when Twitter came out, there was a wonderful pile of crazy third-party clients for Twitter. And I have an entire page of my iPhone, which is just Mastodon clients. I think there's like 14 different ones. Some are progressive web apps, some are clients. And it's like, why not? Because we can. So that's the promise of the Wild West of a federated universe of loosely confederated open standards, right? And that's the excitement that I assume you all are caught up in.
Absolutely. And for a time when we were building Elk, other people were doing the same. It still are. It's the Wild West, but in a sort of positive and affirming kind of Wild West way. I think there are other Wild Wests in tech at the moment that are maybe a little bit more you might get shot kind of. But Mastodon is not like that. It is the sort of vibrant, innovative community. And so lots of frameworks were building their own. There was a Preact clone. There's an amazing one called Pinafore, which had just incredible accessibility. And I'm sure on your phone screen, you could probably point to quite a few of those. And we had people who contributed to Elk, who then went off and built their own thing as well, but still stuck around and helped out with Elk. So it really was, we're all having fun doing this and hacking away at clients for this. And then, of course, under the hood, Mastodon is the network. Obviously, is powered by something called ActivityPub. So when you follow people, you get you basically say, "Hey, tell me when you post something," and then their server, like their email server, like an email server, I guess, notifies yours when something has been posted, and so you then can see it. But under the hood, of course, there's a whole ecosystem of things using that protocol, that activity protocol, that pub protocol. So there's Pleroma, and there's all kinds of different. There's Glitch, and there's even different families like MissKey and CalcKey that are all doing something similar, and somehow they're all mostly compatible, and we're all talking to each other still. So just as you have this multiplicity of clients, you have the multiplicity of servers, each of which may be running one of very many different sort of sets of software on it. The whole thing is really incredible when you think about it.
One of the things that's significant, you mentioned Pinafore, you mentioned Elk, and I mentioned my screen of Mastodon clients, is that I can't tell which of these are web apps and which of these came from the store. Yeah. And like I've said it before, and I think we just can't pound this drum enough. Progressive web apps are just this dark horse that are happening. In the example of my iPhone, it's only Apple that is holding us back and preventing us from doing some of the amazing things. But what's wonderful about it is from a user's perspective, other than the install moment when you say add to home screen, in this case of Elk, you go to elk.zone, you say share, and then add to home. And at that point, you stop interacting from the user's perspective with a web page. You start having a web app. How hard is that to get right? Are you fighting with Apple as much as I feel like you are? Does it just work on Android? And do you think that this is the way all of our apps should be in the future?
I love progressive web apps because I think, first of all, anything with progressive in the title, I'm going to be in favor of, because the whole idea of having a good experience, no matter what, but it just gets better as the capabilities of your device get better. That is a really nice model for rolling anything out on the web. And then I think, we see that a little bit with Apple, to the extent that Apple has been held back, perhaps, in terms of some of the features it supports. Recently, notification support shipped on iPhone. I don't know if you've received notifications. If was that an iPhone I saw there? Are they coming through? That's an exciting moment, isn't it? When the same app that you had is now suddenly doing new things. And absolutely, there's a degree of fighting, but the whole progressive web app experience, from the point of view of a developer of Elk, is not bad. So one of the team, the guy who built Vite PWA, which is a PWA integration, which handles all of the plumbing behind the scenes, the creation of that service worker that's going to sync all the scripts that are needed to render the pages and cache them behind the scenes, that's going to periodically check to see if there's anything updated, that's going to register that connection for push notifications. All of that plumbing is done by the integration. Joaquin actually built a Nuxt module for it, for Elk, and then afterwards extracted it and made it its own NPM package. So you can actually go and install it in your own project and get exactly the same kind of experience. So from a developer point of view, it's great. You sort of install it in your project, you configure it, and you're ready to go. And the same library exists for lots of other frameworks too. So there's fighting from the point of view of, we would really like it to be a better experience on iOS particularly. But a PWA is already a fantastic experience on Android, for example, or even on desktop environments where you can actually, have it in your, if it's macOS, it can be sitting in your dock, or if it's Windows, it can basically be an app in your taskbar. I think it surprises me sometimes how far PWAs have come in recent years, to the extent that they can actually behave and access functionality that you would expect a native app would be the only thing that could touch.
Yeah, right now I just loaded up Elk on my iPhone, and in the upper right corner next to my icon, it says Update Elk. So I just tap that. It looks like it did a refresh, and now my version number has moved forward, which I can only see by going into the about. It just felt like it cleared its cache and then updated itself. Is that something that PWAs do for free, or is there some underlying framework that's making that update even cleaner?
Yes, so that update is we're in control of that. In fact, we're in control of quite a lot of it for Elk, because although you can just install something and have it just work behind the scenes, particularly for something that is serving social media, and we want to be as integrated as possible, we have the hooks to customize it. So this in particular won't show you that notification until it's already checked that obviously there's an update, but also until it had a chance to actually download it. So you won't see the update until actually you have downloaded the update and it's ready to go. So again, you wouldn't get a weird experience of clicking and then, sorry, we're just going to download everything now. So we do actually actively go. We have a list of files that we're going to make sure are synced to your device. This is maybe a little bit overkill for Elk, because obviously if you're offline, there's a limit to which you're not really going to be able to interact with an online social network. But we can make the experience a lot better. And we also save ourselves a lot, because it means that you're not having to hit us to download new copies of everything. We can cache things, in your browser cache for, and have very granular control over that cache, deliberately clearing it when we want, or letting the browser cache it for as long as it makes sense.
Well, and that really speaks again to the philosophy of Nuxt being both intuitive but also focused on the user. I think right now users expect to press update and an update experience starts and a process begins, and then you wait around. But by doing all of that quietly in the background, pushing update just makes me love Elk even more, because I go, oh, well, that was lovely. It took no time at all. And that's because it was just basically doing an A/B switch behind the scenes. And that's amazing. And you just kind of keep doing your thing.
Hopefully. Well, I think there's this question people ask. Which do you prioritize? Developer experience? User experience? It's a tricky one, but I think it's not a zero-sum game, right? That's the only answer to that question. You have to say it's not necessarily a choice between, either the developers are scrolling zeros and ones on pieces of paper, or users are having a good experience. Pick one, or you know what I'm saying. And I don't think it's that choice. I don't think you have to suffer pain as a developer in order to create a good experience for your user. Ideally, you should be able to have both.
And then we mentioned and talked a little bit about how the Fediverse is federated. It is. You're not necessarily talking to the backend elk.zone. That web server serves the HTML, serves the manifest, serves the JavaScript. Other than the notification services, is there any backend to Elk, as we would think about it as being a logical business logic backend?
So there is a backend, and there is a serverless function which serves up Elk. So all of the JavaScript assets, they're obviously static. They're served up by a CDN. But we do have a server that handles a couple of things. One, it handles the creation of the OAuth flow. So when you try and log into your own server, and this is the only thing that we do, when you try and log into your own Mastodon server, we need to register with that server and get a client secret, which is going to let us sign a callback URL. And we do that. So we register, we store this in our own database. So Nuxt has a built-in key value store interface, which can be backed up by any key value store that you have. So we are at the moment using Cloudflare KV storage, but you can use, PlanetScale, Redis, any of the many Azure KV stores that exist, pretty much anything. It doesn't matter. And so we store that we give you a callback URL, and then from that point onward, the callback URL takes you to your browser, and then the secret is stored in your browser and is then effectively the key that you use to interact with your server and get the list of posts and everything from that point onward. So Elk doesn't handle any of that. In fact, we don't even handle the web push notifications. Again, there's just that one initial registration with the server. We then get a vapid URL, which we then pass on to you. And so your service worker at your end is able, at the user users and is able to then communicate directly with the Mastodon server that you are connecting to. So we are really quite minimal on the back end as far as Elk is concerned.
I want to just call out, I like to expand acronyms. You said VAPID, V-A-P-I-D, Voluntary Application Server Identity. It's a way for you to receive, website to do push notifications. Please continue.
Yeah. I'm not even sure I knew that, so I really appreciate you telling me that, Scott.
Not everyone speaks English as their first language, and nor do they speak acronyms, so I try to expand acronyms whenever I can.
No, absolutely. We are actually at some point implementing, we have a small team. A lot of the development of Elk has been driven by people who are experts in or developers of a library or technology. And they've come on board and they've built something and we've made it part of the project. And that's been amazing to see. But there's been one small group of people building an Elk native project, which basically takes the Elk web app and embeds it in a Towery shell. And at some point, we needed to figure out how is it going to be possible to make this work? Because we really rely on a lot of the stuff that we do with the PWA, and we rely on the fact that there's a server behind it. We actually moved the entirety of the server part of Elk for this project into the browser. So it could actually run on a separate layer, as it were, in the browser, handling all the stuff that you would expect a server to do. That is maybe a little bit of a hack, but I thought it was cool.
Well, so is that a hack or is that the future of computing? Because we keep hearing about the edge computing, and I've got this perfectly reasonable pocket supercomputer with 8 processors and 8 gigs of RAM. I think it could probably handle that little bit of work, and that just takes less effort for your servers.
Well, you're right. It's not a lot of work. It is just a couple of HTTP requests. I think it's going to become more common because Nuxt 2, for example, was built on Node. The whole concept was you have this Node server, and it needs to be run in that environment. Very different from a browser environment. It has different globals. It has different APIs that you can do things like import built-ins. Whereas now that doesn't feel something we can take for granted. We're building for browser-like runtimes, workers, Cloudflare workers, for example, and there are edge functions. Dino has a very different API. And a lot of this is built on and patterned on browser APIs, which I think is really a very interesting future to see when we're thinking about servers. So maybe that ties it together, back end and front end in the browser.
Well, there's definitely a lot of words for people to learn if they have been out of the JavaScript community for a while. You mentioned Dino just then, a modern runtime for TypeScript and for JavaScript. And we have Nuxt. We can learn about it at nuxt.com, and we can learn about Vue, and we can learn about all these wonderful things, but we can see them in use at elk.zone. So if you're on Mastodon, any Mastodon server at all, even your own private one, you can go to elk.zone on your phone or on your desktop or in whatever stores that you get your apps, and you can check out a wonderful PWA that works really, really well right now. Thanks so much for chatting with me today.
Oh, no, it's been a real pleasure. And I should say, if anyone does have any questions or if anything wasn't clear, please do contact me because I'm hopefully very accessible, findable by my name. And I would be really happy to answer any questions if I've left you confused or there's something I said that needs further thought.
I appreciate that. You haven't left me confused. You've left me inspired and excited to explore new things. And you can connect with Daniel at roe.dev, and his socials are at the bottom of that page. This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.